Welcome to the Intuitive Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Rafferty, a shamanic healer that's trained in Western medicine and acupuncture. And I'm here to bring you on a journey of holistic healing that explores the science of the physical body, combined with mental and emotional well-being, energetic and spiritual health. And I am very excited to have you here for another episode as we approach our 50th episode. Can you believe it? So I have been really contemplating wanting to do this pod for some time. And I had a really fascinating conversation yesterday with someone about near-death experiences. And I thought to myself, that was a sign for me to actually do this episode and get it out there. Because the conversation was just so fascinating. It was so fascinating around near-death experiences. And we were talking about all the books that we'd read and kind of different experiences we both had with people we had met that kind of expressed kind of insights into their own near-death experiences. And of course, working as a shamanic healer, I'm in this space an awful lot. People tell me the most fascinating stories, and I have been on a journey with people in preparation for dying, in people who have had near-death circumstances and have come back from that, and also supporting people in the transition into the spirit world. And of course, a very large portion of my work is actually working with souls on the other side of the veil. Souls that come to help people heal, that are with me, their clients, and also to help people beyond the veil heal. And sometimes the client that comes through the door and actually ends up on the plinth, they're here to help a soul on the other side. So it's really fascinating work. And I just wanted to speak into that a little bit more. So today I'll be kind of going through a little bit about the kind of what kind of different cultures have kind of recorded or how they view this transition from the physical world into the spirit world. And particularly I want to focus in on kind of what the Egyptian belief is, because I found it fascinating when I was doing research for this episode. And I just wanted to tell you guys all about it because it's just so interesting. And I'm going to talk very briefly about kind of the fact that modern science is now kind of catching up with some of the data that we are producing. And this is the thing about science. You know, I'm trained, I have a PhD, a medical degree, like I worked in research for donkey's years, but actually doing spiritual and energetic work, the stuff that happens in this space and on this plinth, I have to tell you, it is just magic in action. And I just don't think science has the tools yet to actually document or kind of accurately measure exactly what happens in this space. And, you know, maybe we will catch up, but maybe we won't. And I really do feel what triggers me a lot on reading stuff online, especially Instagram, you know, it's this kind of really fixed narrative or view that a lot of people in science or medicine actually have. It kind of closes down this whole other part of existence, which I feel is actually the much bigger picture. So I really have had some interesting experiences with death through the medical system and how we view that. But now, because I work very prominently as a shamanic healer, my view of death and dying is so different. And the impact we can have in this world as souls that are walking around on our own death and dying experience, but also how we can help people who have previously died from this physical world. It is just incredible. And what I say to people when they step off the plinth at the end of a session is, I don't really think we will fully understand the extent of the work that is done in each one of these sessions until we ourselves go back to the soul space and we can feel into and fully comprehend and interpret exactly the impact that we have had, because there is such a ripple effect that goes on beyond the veil. And I think we are just helping our own soul to evolve, but also helping people within the lineage, the collective. I just think this work is just mind-blowing. And, you know, the deeper that people get into it, it's a sticky journey because we're exploring our shadow. We're exploring themes, obviously, in this episode of death and dying, but also the gift that you can give to yourself and others, both in this physical world and beyond the veil. And the thing about this work is, I feel like we've really lost touch in a lot of senses. Culturally, with what the dying experience actually is and what it looks like. And even my gorgeous partner just recently lost his mother. But the whole process takes place in the space of about 24 hours over in Brazil. Whereas in Ireland, there's a wake. It takes time. You mourn with the body for a couple of days before it goes into the ground. And of course, in the UK, when I lived there and I worked in the hospital, I trained in the NHS, people would be have passed away, and it will be 3 or 4 weeks before a funeral takes place. And it's kind of like, what way is the right way of doing this, But it's almost like we've lost touch with the ceremony of death and kind of the preparation of the soul in this whole journey as well. And I find that really, really interesting. And, the more work that I do with certain people that come through the door, they have the energy of keeners. And keeners used to be this group of women that used to turn up to these events, and they literally acted like grief channels. So they would keen and they would cry and they would wail at funerals, which actually assisted with the clearing of the grief and the energy from the people that were at the gathering. And I just find that fascinating. And they actually became illegal. And I just find the whole concept wild, as kind of Catholicism came in and kind of separated us out from that in a lot of ways. And, as someone who has worked with people through this process, and then I attend funerals, there's a part of me sometimes that's like, we're missing the trick here. Are we really celebrating the soul and honoring the soul as it transitions? And, there's ways in which I do that myself or with groups of people after a passing that I tend to kind of support people with. And this work can extend for many weeks and months and years into a journey with someone that has passed away. So that's just a little bit of a background. I get very excited talking about this because I think it's really special kind of work. So I wanted to introduce what the theory or the concept of a psychopomp is. So it comes from a Greek word, or a combination of Greek words, and psyche means soul and pompous means guide or a conductor. And a psychopomp is literally a soul guide. It's someone or something like an energy, an entity, a guide who actually accompanies the soul beyond the threshold of death. And, as someone who works as a shaman, I am regularly involved with this kind of transitory time. But it is interesting because obviously there's guides on the other side of the veil that do this work as well. And I find it so interesting because over the last couple of years, I've met more and more death doulas that are kind of involved in kind of preparation and the death and dying process. And this is just such a beautiful soul-based job. Absolutely very not easy to do because you're dealing with people's grief every day. And you have to have really good energetic boundaries and protection for yourself with this. But I think it is just such precious and amazing work, And, if we actually look at different figures throughout different cultures, you can actually see that there are different gods or guides that are deemed to be psychopomps that you can call on the energetics of to help with these transitions with loved ones. So in Greek tradition, they had Hermes. In Egypt, they have the god Anubis. And I'm going to go into a bit of detail about the journey with Anubis because I just find the concept and the imagery and what it conjures up for me just so fascinating. And in Norse belief, they have Valkyries. So, in different cultures, there's essentially very different kind of representatives of what a psychopomp actually is. But it's all the same kind of idea that, you know, death isn't necessarily automatic. It's something that requires assistance for the passage. And through a more shamanic lens, I kind of sit with this sometimes and I think, you know, not every soul is going to need uh, uh, a psychopomp as such to help them across the veil, because oftentimes there's like spirit guides, there's ancestors, there's loved ones that come to collect souls. That's what I see in some of my work. However, for the more kind of shocking deaths that may have been a bit of a surprise or traumatic, I tend to find that sometimes those souls need some support to actually move on to onto the next world. And of course, because I do a lot of fertility work, I do a lot of women's health work, I do a lot of womb-based healing, actually supporting little souls that are still within the womb space to transition is a huge part of my womb healing. And I absolutely love that work. And during the womb healing ceremony, we call on, well, I use guides, Archangel Michael and Archangel Azrael as the psychopomps that come in and actually support with the transition of these energies. Because sometimes the little soul energy stays within the womb space, tethered by energy cords, and that little soul needs to be supported to move back to the light. And the way I tend to see the world these days, there's such energetic density around the world. It's just a dense energy that kind of surrounds the world. And I think we're on this huge journey of evolution. I think the awakening of the divine feminine is upon us. And, you know, I do really feel that we are moving more towards a state of light. I really do feel that, even though at times it can be very hard to navigate through the sticky, dense energy of the shadow that's coming up to be cleared. But with that, sometimes I find we need these little light bridges. So whether it's the shaman, whether it's the guide on the other side of the veil, sometimes we need to establish those light bridges to help some of these little souls pass back and forth. And similarly, I'll call on very specific energetics to call souls in. And, you know, so the bridge, this kind of beautiful rainbow bridge, this light bridge works both ways. And essentially, I tend to think of it in this modern time as a passage through the shadow or the dense stagnancy that surrounds the world. And it's really interesting because I really find Carl Jung's work quite fascinating in how he viewed the world in a lot of senses. But he used the word psychopomp as well as more of a psychological term for a figure, whether that's kind of a guide, I suppose, or a therapist or an image in your dreams or whatever that might be. But it's a figure who actually helps a person move between states of consciousness. So it's not just literal death in some senses. He interpreted it that we actually move through different states of consciousness. And just like the work that I do here, I'm fully conscious sitting with someone on having a consultation, but you dip in and out, and this shaman calls it this kind of lucid dreaming or this kind of second vision, I sometimes refer to it as, or the second sight, in which you dip into a different state of consciousness in order to retrieve messages for your client. So whether that's from a soul that's come in and wants to communicate something, or you're helping somebody beyond the veil, or whether that kind of soul energy has come in because they want to support the client in whatever healing they need to take place in, or whether it's a guide that wants to hold a specific vibrational energy of healing for whatever that client needs. So it's really, really interesting because you can kind of dip in and out of these different states of consciousness. And that's more a kind of a Jungian mentality around it, you know. So it's really, really interesting. But I just wanted to speak in specifically to the Egyptian kind of view of death and this kind of transitory time. And because I just found it so interesting, and I was like, do you know what? If I find it interesting, hopefully the listeners will too. So death in Egyptian culture was treated more as a structured journey with a known route. And, you know, it's documented in various different texts that the Egyptians have. Specifically, the Egyptian Book of the Dead describes it as the soul's passage through judgment. Now, when I was researching this, my mind was blown because I work a lot with Egyptian guides. I'm attuned to the Seikim Reiki lineage. I'm a Seikim master. And so I connect a lot with the Egyptian guides. And I often work with Anubis for various different ceremonial work. And in fact, I'm on pilgrimage over in Egypt in the next couple of weeks to connect with the energetics of the divine feminine and the rose lineage. And I really adore the Egyptian guides and what they teach beyond the veil. But Anubis essentially is the jackal-headed Egyptian god of embalming, mummification, and the protection of graves. And he's often depicted, if you see images of him, as a full black canine or as a man that has a jackal's head. You know, with some of these guides or some of these images of these guides, they have different animal masks on. It's just so cool. I just love it. This kind of weaving in of animal energy, animal magic. And as a shaman, I just find that fascinating because I use power animals. I use the energetics of the collective energy of different animal guides on my journey with my clients. But it is really interesting because Anubis is often seen or depicted kneeling beside a scales in which he weighs the heart of a person who has just died. So the Egyptians believed that the heart and not the head or the brain, it was actually the heart, was the seat of all thought, of emotion, of memory, of moral character. So if Anubis was to come and weigh that, you could actually get a sense of whether the person was good or not. It was a literal record of everything that they'd done and intended, whether it was good or bad or not. So that's what this whole premise of Anubis weighing the heart resides upon. Now, the heart was placed on one side of a scale and it was weighed against a feather on the other. And the feather represented Mat. And Mat is basically the concept of goodness and truth and balance and cosmic order in the world. So essentially, if you were weighing the weight of this heart against this beautiful energy of Mat, you could essentially tell whether there was whether they would weigh heavily against this kind of beautiful energy of purity on one side. Now, what was really interesting was before the heart was weighed, the deceased was asked to recite a specific confession from the Book of the Dead. And it specifically asked them to list the things throughout their life that they had not done. So, you know, was phrased more so in a series of denials rather than claiming all the good deeds that you'd done. So it was like, I have not stolen, I have not killed, etc., etc., etc. And what's really interesting is the test wasn't really whether you were good or not. It was, were you in balance with Mat or divine order? So essentially what that means is, did you live in a way that upheld order rather than actually disrupted or disrespected it? So if the heart was heavier than the feather, meaning it weighed down considerably with all the wrongdoing you had done in the world, it wasn't actually consumed by punishment in an ongoing sense. It was actually devoured immediately by another entity called Amit. And, you know, that was a creature that was composed of a crocodile head, a lion body, and a hippo hindquarters. And, you know, if you actually think about this, it's so fascinating because that act in which Amit consumed the heart of this soul, that ended the soul's existence entirely. So there was no afterlife. There was no continuation for that soul at all. And for Egyptians, this was considered to be significantly worse than non-exist, or it was significantly worse. And because non-existence, it just meant that the soul didn't exist anymore. And that was the worst possible outcome for anybody on this journey. So, you know, the ceremony itself actually weighed up whether the soul got to exist or not. And I think if you look at kind of Catholicism and kind of this view of kind of heaven and hell, being punished for eternity if you ended up in hell, the Egyptians actually believed that that was better than not existing at all. So, it's really quite fascinating in terms of kind of how other religions and cultures view what's best for the soul. Now, it's really, really interesting because the Egyptians were obviously very worried about their hearts testifying against them. So you'll have probably seen the imagery of this, the scarab amulet, the scarab beetle, this amulet that's often placed sometimes on the heart space. And, in Egyptian culture, this beautiful scarab amulet often had spells recited over it. And it was put onto the chest of the mummy, and the spells specifically instructed the heart not to speak against the deceased during this trial with Anubis. So, essentially it was like, please heart, don't go against me here. And this little scarab amulet was the protector. I just absolutely love that. Now, so just to finish up our kind of discussion about this journey with Anubis, Anubis was the god that actually did the physical weighing of the heart. He adjusted the scale. He would weigh up essentially whether the weight of the heart against this kind of divine order, this mat, what was actually happening on that front. Thoth, which was another god, he was the scribe god. He actually recorded the results of that. And then Osiris actually presided over the verdict as to what was going to happen. So in this ceremony, you can see there was 3 different gods or guides that kind of determined the outcome for that soul. So there was the guide, there was the record keeper, and the judge, essentially. And I just find it really, really fascinating. And I think this kind of journey with the weight of the heart, and it's so significant because kind of through a lot of my shamanic training, I really focus on the energy of the heart. And there's been a lot of books written about the heart of the shaman. And, the heart is the bridge between the 3 lower chakras, our earthly world chakras, and the wounds that we hold in the physical body. Through trauma and all of these things. And essentially the upper 3 chakras, which are considered more expressive and kind of energetic centers, connected more to the divine and are more kind of connection to spirit. So it kind of is this beautiful bridge between the lower chakras and the upper chakras. And also in Reiki, we learn that actually the heart is a really key space in which, you attune yourself to different energies. And the Reiki master basically opens up this portal or this kind of this attunement to the different energies that runs through your body. It's essentially like they just tune in your frequency or vibration into the right radio channel so you can pick up a clear signal, is how I tend to say it to people. And that's through your attunement ceremonies. And essentially the energy typically comes in through the crown, it moves into the heart, and then it moves down your arms and out your hands. And then you basically have hands of light, essentially, is what the kind of concept is there. So it's really interesting that the heart is one of these central or key themes in different traditions or cultures that specifically kind of focus on energy and healing. And obviously in the Egyptian tradition, this kind of the significance of the fact that it actually holds so much of your life memory. And actually, through a lot of my Buddhist teachings as well, we do a meditation called a metta bhavana, which is when you cultivate loving kindness for yourself in your own heart, and then you kind of spread it around the world. But we actually view the heart as the place of the true mind in some senses. So it's a beautiful energy center. And I actually find that as we allow the energy in the heart to blossom and grow in our life, it can have profound impacts for ourselves and everybody around us. So really interesting there how it's linked to so deeply to the essence of the soul, and how it's viewed in kind of this ancient Egyptian tradition as kind of the the determinant of whether the soul lives or not. Absolutely fascinating. So I just want to move on now and speak a little bit about I'm just going to touch very briefly onto the scientific background behind kind of what modern clinical research is actually starting to kind of identify related to kind of this period of death and dying. And like I say, when I first started this journey as a shaman, I became obsessed with reading about near-death experiences, like absolutely obsessed. And there's loads of different books and texts that you can find out there now. And they're referred to as kind of near-death experiences. And the reason I love them so much, it's because people went beyond the veil and then came back and told of their experience. And I just find it fascinating. And I will never forget when I was actually setting up the practice here. I remember on one of the days before we opened, I went down, the guy that was dropping off the skip for us to actually offload all the extra bits and pieces that were here. That I was cleaning out before we opened. He had a cardiac arrest and he had a near-death experience. And I had this amazingly beautiful, profound conversation for 20 or 30 minutes with this amazing man about his near-death experience and what he experienced beyond the veil. And he basically really kind of solidified a lot of what I'd been reading at the time and what I ultimately ended up working with in the practice about this journey of what his soul perceived after he was pronounced kind of clinically dead, and resuscitation started taking place on him. And it very much is in alignment with what kind of Raymond Moody, in his kind of documented text or his book Life After Life in 1975, documented. And that was a pattern that was typically seen in people at the time of death. So this chap that I was speaking to basically spoke exactly about what I had read in Raymond Moody's texts. And it was that a tunnel formed. And it was a tunnel that basically moved more towards this kind of space of light. And as he moved through the tunnel and into the space of the light, he was overcome with this sense of peace and serenity, and this deep essence of love moved through his energy body. And essentially, he was then met with certain guides. And in his case, it was actually his deceased father. And that family member actually brought him as a soul to have a life review. And this is kind of a space in which you kind of go through the motions of reviewing all of the circumstances in your life. Now, the more that you read about this, it's really fascinating because it's really documented by people who've experienced this as an utterly non-judgmental overview of your life, that you are the judge and jury in that circumstance, in which you get the opportunity as a soul to review your life experiences and how you responded to different people and circumstances and places and things. And I just think that is so interesting, like this journey of learning that we do as souls with human bodies for this really short little snippet of time. And then we go back and review, actually, could I have done things differently, essentially? So absolutely fascinating talking to this chap. Now, Bruce Grayson in the 1980s, he actually came up with a near-death experience scale, which was a standardized way to measure and compare reported experiences. And it is so interesting because you do, just like this chap told me, and he had no idea I'd been doing all this reading around it. I just find life fascinating with these synchronicities. But he experienced it in a way that was documented by Raymond Moody and Bruce Grayson on this kind of scale of experience as to what actually happened. Now, I want to speak very briefly about a couple of different studies that have been done. So Pim van Lommel is a Dutch cardiologist and actually with a team of researchers undertook a prospective study across 10 different hospitals, and it was published in The Lancet in 2001. And essentially what they did was follow 344 survivors of cardiac arrest. Now, cardiac arrest obviously is when you have a heart-related event. that often requires resuscitation. So that's kind of chest compressions and the breath of life, essentially, is what many people kind of know this as. And in this study that was published in 2001, about 18%, so that's 1 in 5, had some memory of the period they were clinically unconscious. Like, that's amazing. Like 1 in 5. And around 12% described a full near-death experience, or the NDE experience that we previously just addressed. So that is just fascinating to me. That's fascinating. And I love that there's data beginning to kind of emerge. And like, that was essentially 25 years ago when that was first published, you know? Now, there have been other studies that were done, and in 2023, Sam Parnia published the AWARE and the AWARE 2 studies, in which they actually used brain monitoring during CPR events. And they showed, actually, in a significant number of patients, that there was lucid EEG patterns. So remember what I was talking about previously with this second sight, or this lucid dreaming, where you're in another space, but you know, some of us can do that consciously if you kind of cultivate that skill. But, you know, when we actually dream, we also go into this kind of other lucid world where we can experience things. And what was really interesting was, they measured these EEG lucid patterns up to an hour into resuscitation. And then in some of those patients, they essentially then were able to recall experiences of awareness of kind of this lucid state without actually a sense of distress linked to it. So it's really interesting that this kind of data is emerging around some of this stuff. But essentially, the data has not explained why these experiences happen. And there is no consensus on what consciousness is, or essentially what actually happens to our consciousness or our soul after we die. So that's currently open to scientific debate. And, you know, I do think it can be quite hard to understand some of these more broader concepts of potentially the soul or consciousness without actually having some sort of awareness or insight, or kind of, I suppose, a keenness to understand kind of spirituality or energetics. And that's the thing with science sometimes. It's all very black and white on the paper, but actually there's so much more that goes on beyond that, you know? So as a shaman that kind of does this work, I wanted to speak into some of the experiences that I have had in the practice. And, you know, some of these kind of practical kind of engagements that I've had with people, they have kind of spanned loads of different kind of experiences for that patient or that client. For some people, they come into me with a terminal illness, and it's about preparing them for that kind of transition time when their soul leaves the physical body. And what do I do within that? Essentially, I help them to sit and look at their life journey. And sometimes we go back into past lives and kind of do some lineage healing work. And it can be really, really profound for that soul before they transition. And, you know, that can be working through the energetics of kind of some cord cutting. So you have energetic attachments in this world that kind of bind you to certain experiences, places, things. Sometimes it can be unfinished business. It can be grief, you know, it can be relationships that kind of bind us and hold us in some senses. And keeping in mind, I've spoken in previous pods into kind of karmic relationships or soul journeys that we go on with people. And I tend to say to people, you know, it's good to reach resolution sometimes in this life. It's good to actually sit and reflect on our kind of learning experiences while we still have our human physical body, and make peace with some of this stuff so we don't carry it into our future lives. So it's really, really interesting. But essentially, all of this kind of work revolves around the energy center, or the luminous energy field, which shamans work on. So that's your energy body. It works at kind of going into your chakras, kind of clearing any stagnancy in the energy body, making sure that your energy system is flowing really, really well. Now, I just want to speak into a specific couple of cases that I had, because some of them have been profoundly touching for me in so many different ways. And, some of them have actually been with very close friends and family. And, for one of the most, I think, traumatic kind of times I've been through was when my mother got really, really sick on the back of a colonoscopy in which her bowel became perforated. And, it was through a series of unfortunate events clinically, and things weren't necessarily picked up or done the way that they probably should have been. And this is as a doctor, so you can imagine the journey through all of this, but in the hospital system. But essentially, she became sicker and sicker, and she got septic, and she went in for surgery and ended up having this major intra-abdominal bleed. And it was very, very near-death experience. And I always remember my mom telling me when she was having this big bleed, as they were wheeling her down the corridor towards the surgery, she just kept coming in and out of consciousness. She described it as a lucid dream kind of state. And she could just see the flashing lights of the corridor flashing as she was rushed down to theatre. And I will never forget that experience, because I could feel her presence so strongly with me, because I've done so much energy healing on my mom. And especially during that kind of window of time when she was so sick, I so intricately linked to her soul and her soul healing, that I always kind of perceived or sensed when something wasn't quite right or when something was going on. And I was actually leading a retreat in France, and at that time, and I just remember getting this deep sense of something wasn't right. And I had all these missed calls, and there was so much happening when I kind of came out of my sessions on this retreat, that when I kind of tuned into the energy of where she was at, it was almost like her soul wasn't fully present in her body. She was in having surgery, essentially. And, when she was having all these different surgeries, we had kind of energetically agreed that her soul would come and feel safe with me when she was in having these surgeries. It was a safe space in which I could hold the energy of her soul before she went back to the body when she was waking up. That's why I find surgery so wild in so many ways. But it was really fascinating, because on the days of her surgeries, I'd clear the schedule and I'd hold a lovely, very safe, energetic space for her to come. And it wasn't that there was much energetic interaction there. It was almost like she was in an animated state, in this kind of lucid dream space in some senses, but at least she had an anchor. And it is really interesting, because some people that have had near-death experiences in theatres and things like that, they can see, they always have a sense of their soul being up out of the body, looking down on what was happening. And some of the documented case studies around this, people actually report specific individuals or things that were happening in the room, and they can recall that. Like, it's just mind-blowing. But essentially, when we were doing a lot of the healing work, during that time, she ended up in the intensive care unit. And at the time, she said every time she went to sleep or she closed her eyes, she'd go into this lucid state in which she felt she was dreaming of her funeral. And it was such a significant journey for her. I honestly think it was literally a death and a rebirth for her soul experience. But I did have one really, really in-depth healing experience with her when she was deeply, deeply sick. And especially during that time when I was doing some distance healing on her, when she was in the ICU and in theatre. And I actually asked her soul, I said, do you want to come back? Do you want to come back? Or is this a time in which you want to transition? Because during those times, there was a lot of loved ones present. A lot of our family lineage came to be with my mother during that time. And it was just fascinating. So I was like, are these souls here to collect you, essentially? Or are they just here to provide energetic support for you? And her soul was very firm at the time. She's like, no, I'm coming back. So it was amazing, because on multiple occasions, it was literally like I was going to collect her soul and just continue to bring it back to the body, to check in with her. Is this something you want to continue to do? And she was like, yes. and the soul would return to the body. And, we came out the other side of that. It was a multi-year journey that basically ended up from something that, from a procedure that didn't need to necessarily inflict what happened. So it's wild to think someone could use years of their life and their reserve in the way that they did. But it was quite wild in so many senses to come out the other side of that, because if I put my hand on my heart, I honestly do think some of the medical team that did the surgeries to save my mother were absolutely exceptional, and I'll be forever grateful to those individuals in that acute setting. But I honestly, really, hand on my heart, think the energetic work and the support of the guides that we were working with at that time was what actually saved her in the end and brought the soul on the journey that it needed to go on. And, I have spoken to souls beyond the veil that maybe haven't had that kind of energetic support. And this is what's so wild, because in the medical system and the structure, we've lost touch with spirituality. Like, if there were spiritual guides in the hospital, if there were shamans, if there were medicine people that could work on a soul-based level to support people on this journey, like, I really think outcomes would be so different. Like, I feel this about fertility. I feel it about pregnancy and birth. I feel it about medicine in general, that our kind of our egoic minds and our desire for numbers and facts and all these things have kind of disconnected us with the essence of the soul and the spirit, Now, that was a circumstance in which I helped someone, my beautiful mother, kind of navigate this journey, the in-between period of kind of the soul coming and going and kind of choosing to ultimately stay. And this kind of near-death kind of circumstance that she found herself in at that time. And so thankfully, her soul opted to stay and be present with us here. However, there have been other circumstances in which I've helped souls transition. So, in one of the earlier podcasts, I spoke to this beautiful woman, Orla, and she'd been on a journey with her husband who had died of motor neurons disease. And, they had asked if I'd come out and sit with him. And it was so interesting, because when I first started working with Fraser, he was an incredibly talented and gifted man. He was an architect and a designer and a creator. And he ended up doing amazing work with his eyes. And he used to design beautiful things with just the movement of his eyes and this fabulous computer technology towards the end. And what was really interesting is he would have described himself as an atheist. And, when I sat with him, he used to use his eyes to type things out on the computer, and we'd have these incredible conversations. But I did a lot of deep healing with him over the space of about a year, in which we connected him in with the guides and the angels, the archangels, and the different ancestors that he was going to journey with when his soul was ready to leave his physical body. So he already had a point of contact that he knew would come and collect his soul and help him over this rainbow bridge, help him over the light bridge. And that brought a lot of reassurance for him as he transitioned closer to the time at which his soul left his body. And it was amazing, because we actually did a lot of work to kind of do some energy clearing, to do some cord cutting, to do some soul retrieval work, in which we went back to different times of his life to actually make sure that his soul was whole. And I speak into this in other episodes. I do a lot of soul retrieval work in the practice. Essentially, soul retrieval is required when we've experienced such deep trauma in life that the soul felt it just couldn't handle the magnitude of the suffering it was experiencing. So a little part of the soul left and went away. Now, from a psychotherapeutic perspective, sometimes we call that dissociation or detachment. And, we often do kind of inner child work to call these little parts of ourselves back. But from a shamanic perspective, we actually believe this to be a part of our soul. And, we can call back that part of our soul and reintegrate it into our energy being, so that when our soul decides to leave, we're more whole. We don't have to do as much healing in this kind of intermediate space or in the future lives that we incarnate into down the line. Now, it was really very, very beautiful because he had this journey of energy. He had this journey of connection. We did soul retrieval. We did cord cutting. We did so much work together. And it was an incredible journey to be on with Fraser. It was absolutely incredible. And his beautiful wife and his child. And even how he celebrated and was celebrated after his transition. Earl had the most beautiful celebration of his life, which was unlike any other kind of funeral I'd ever been to. It was truly so beautiful. And I really thought this is the essence of what passing is like. It gave me a flavor for what kind of the community and the union of different souls coming together to support this person that was passing and their loved ones was like. And it was just such a special experience to be a part of. And similarly, I did a lot of work with my aunt, who I worked with for about a year before her passing. She was diagnosed with a melanoma on her leg. And unfortunately, she ended up with a misdiagnosis of a second primary cancer, which essentially the treatment pathway wasn't as it should have been on that journey. But she was such a fighter. Oh my God. The essence of her soul was to just keep fighting, finding new ways. She actually introduced me to so much work around functional medicine, which was such a gift that she gave me. And so interestingly, because when I was on this path with her, she was doing all this deep diving into her cells and her mitochondrial health and her microbiome and all of this sort of stuff, which essentially with my medical head on, I was kind of like, oh my God, where's she finding this information? Kind of poo-pooing it slightly, because actually it's not what I was taught in medical school. But I think with the journey she went on within the medical system, in which she had absolutely amazing people that advocated so deeply for her. But on the other side of things, there was dismissal and all of these other facets of the more shadow side of the medical system that kind of spurred her into action. You know, she advocated so deeply for herself. But one thing she recognized was I need to heal myself on a soul level, on an emotional level, on a deep level in order to kind of try and get through this. And essentially, we didn't realize at the time when we started into this work, we initially started it to essentially help her to heal her physical body, because the shaman actually believes that once we restore energy flow to the different aspects of our energy system, to our luminous energy body, that actually the body should learn to actually heal and rectify any wounds or issues that are happening on a physical body level if the energy flow is restored to that space. So essentially, that's why she came to see me. So she was working with her medical team and I worked alongside her with all of the energetics. And we went on such a journey. And, you know, it really did make me realize every part of me kind of wanted her to heal, every part of me. But actually the guidance I received throughout that journey was, you know, sometimes this is actually the time in which that soul had predetermined that that was the time and the experience it was going to have before it left the physical world. So, you know, it really kind of made me reflect and see that actually, you know, sometimes this is the soul's journey. This is actually part of the soul's journey, that actually maybe she wasn't meant to be healed, but she was supposed to find herself sitting with me and doing the healing work so that we could go through her life and allow herself to find forgiveness within her heart for aspects of her own journey, and, you know, bring love to those little aspects of her life and her past experiences, and also to find peace in some of the experiences with other people. And it was such an incredible journey to be on. It was so, so profound and so amazing. But what was absolutely fascinating was the transition of her soul. So generally speaking, as someone who works shamanically, I drink a lot of mugwort tea. I use it in ceremony. And that is the tea that shamans use as a dreamtime tea. It's a dreamtime herb. And I usually ask my guides before I go into the dream space, what do I need to know? What's going to happen? Like, I get a lot of information through my dreams, which are fascinating. But this dream that I had the night she passed was the most vivid dream I have ever had. It was literally like I was with her. So that night, I got a deep sense as I was going to sleep. I was like, I think actually her soul is reaching a time in which it's ready to transition. And I went to sleep, and immediately upon going to sleep, I was brought into a big room, and it had 2 doors in it. And she came in through one door, and the essence of her soul was so beautiful. Like in her energy body, it was like her energy body was glowing in the most beautiful purple and blue light. And it was almost like she had stars in her energy body, like she was part of the cosmos. And I just was blown away by how she looked when she came in to see me. And there was all these ancestors gathering in the other rooms. And she shut both of the doors and she said, the souls are coming to collect me, but I need your help. I'm so scared. I am so scared. And I said, well, show me what I need to do to support you with this. So she then basically brought me into this separate room in which her body was lying in a sarcophagus. It looked like one of those big Egyptian sarcophagus that they used to put mummies in. And it was blue and had the most intricate gold emblems all over it. And essentially she was like, I need you to help to free my soul from the physical body. So I opened the sarcophagus and I started to unwind all of the chakras. Now I do that sometimes in my healing sessions. You unwind the chakras in a really specific way to release some of the trapped energy. But in this instance, it started with very specific patterning. As I moved through each of the different chakras, her soul became lighter. And it was almost like I was unzipping the luminous energy body and creating space for her soul to leave. So I basically opened up all of the different chakras. And in this flash of light, her soul just moved up out of her body and out of this sarcophagus. And she turned to me as the soul began to leave and she said, I'm not scared anymore. I'm not scared anymore. And essentially, these 2 lights moved towards us. One of them was my granddad, and one of them was her spirit guide. And, you know, essentially, they collected her and they took her soul. And in that moment, I could see a flash of light moving into all of the ancestors that were gathering in another room. That was my granny. And she told me that she was coming to actually support the souls that were here to process the loss and the grief. So how amazing that these family dynamics, these souls, these energies work with us in different ways. And essentially, in that moment when her soul left that space, I woke up with this start because I'd just gotten a text message to say, your auntie has just passed away. And I was just blown away by that because I literally felt I was present with her at the time of death. I literally felt I was present. It was absolutely incredible. Now, I also, just to kind of pull some of the chords together, when a soul kind of moves beyond this space and into the next soul space, which is without the physical body, sometimes when they haven't actually been able to do some of this kind of preparatory work, or if they've died in a very kind of severe or aggressive way or a violent way, or they were frightened at the time of death, sometimes the clients can come in and we can work with a loved one that has died in that way in order to actually help that soul. And I have had some profound sessions in which clients have come into me and some of their loved ones have died by suicide, or death has been violent or sudden in some way. And we can actually journey to the time of passing for that soul and meet that soul and actually tend to the soul, heal the soul, and call in some guides and ancestors to then carry it back to the light. And that work is so special because it involves a living family member, but they're doing work on behalf of that soul. I just think it is so incredible what we can do for some of our loved ones and our soul friends, our Anamkaras on the other side of the veil. So it's not just about the work that we do for ourselves here. Sometimes it's actually about doing work for other souls as well, which I absolutely love. And I just want to finish with a beautiful story that I read by one of the shamanic teachers that I really love his work. It's Dr. Alberto Villoldo, and he's written some really beautiful books about kind of shamanic healing, and I'm basically attuned or went through the rites of the Munay-Ki, which is essentially what he brought forth to help kind of people within the Western world kind of wake up to kind of shamanic potential within them, the remembering that exists within some of our souls. And one of his books, which is called Shaman, Healer, Sage, has this beautiful passage in it about when himself and the master shaman that was teaching him, they actually learned of one of the most well-renowned master shamans dying in a town nearby. And, you know, everybody, all of the shamans, they all had their discrete territories, but they would all go to support each other in this death and dying process. And it was quite fabulous reading about this, because Alberto and his master, they went to this place of this dying shaman, and everybody gathered within this tiny hut. And, you know, at the time of transition, when that shaman soul decided to leave the physical body, one of the shamans leaned in and they kissed his lips, but essentially in a breath, they took up the essence of his soul. And then the shamans passed that essence through this beautiful kiss from one to another, all around the room, until finally the last shaman opened the window and blew the essence of the soul out and back up to the cosmos, back to the light. And I just absolutely adored that. And if you want to read more about that, I have written about that in one of my blog episodes. And one of the blog posts especially talks a lot about kind of the breath as the essence of the soul. And it kind of goes into actually a little bit about CPR and kind of ancient Egyptian tradition and our association with the breath and the soul. So check out some of the blog posts on my website if you're interested in going a little bit deeper into that. So that was my journey today, and hopefully something that's been thought-provoking for you and touching in some ways about how we ourselves journey with death, how we support others in their death and dying experience, but also how we can help souls beyond the veil heal from their own experience as well. So with love from my heart to yours, my loves, I'll talk to you again in another 2 weeks.